Welcome to No Liberty, No Life. This is the second attempt today to do this broadcast. I had some internet issues, so if you were watching earlier, I apologize. I am redoing it because I think you just technical issues happen sometimes. So um, I wasn't on for a couple days. There was a lot of news that went on. I talked about Venezuela and what my outlook was on it. I still believe that we are not leaving Venezuela, that we are probably going to we learned our lessons from the regime building process before and think that we can make it work this time, and it's with the Venezuelan issue, it's likely to work, and it's very likely that we'll be moving to statehood in a few years for Venezuela. So there's a couple of news segments I thought were important. One that kind of encapsulates the week and what went on. I have this was posted by the U.S. Department of Energy, but it's an interview segment from Face the Nation between Secretary Wright, the Secretary of Energy, and their host. And I think it's very important from a policy standpoint. I mean, this gentleman is obviously a major member of the establishment, and you're kind of hearing what the real stance is on Venezuela and Venezuelan oil and nation building going forward. And then we're going to finish up the segment with going over the top news from a leftist outlet called Democracy Now! So no further ado, I'm going to start the clip, and we'll talk about it. I'll pause here and there and tell you what's really going on. Again, welcome to No Liberty, No Life. I'm your host, Torrin Voss. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Let's make that looks a little bit better. Okay. And feel free to put some comments in if you have any questions or thought process, what's going on. I'll do my best to give you my outtake on it and incorporate what you're talking about. Okay.
It all is the United States Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright. Good to have you here in person.
Thanks for having me, Margaret.
Before I ask you about Venezuela, very quickly, these protests in Iran, that is a country reliant on oil to keep its government-controlled economy afloat. The president's been briefed on military options. What is the U.S. willing to do to help?
Certainly the president has been very outspoken about wanting to have freedom and rule of law and capitalism and great relations with the United States return. So we'll see. I think his moral support has been strong. Certainly he's taken a strong stance against the mullahs in Iran in disabling their nuclear program. I think the people in Iran are rising up because they feel there's a strong America that has their back. I won't go into any specifics there, but we wish them well, and we'd love to see a free and democratic Iran again.
Will there be more interdictions of vessels?
That's saying, oh, my bad. You could hear it, but you couldn't see it. That's basically saying that we're going into Iran. If this continues, these protests, the Iranian people are protesting like this because they believe that they have the backing of the United States and that we will come into their support. And this is basically the Secretary of Energy saying that that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're watching. That's what he's basically saying.
Vessels carrying Iranian oil. Any more activity on that front?
I won't reveal any change in position there.
Okay. Let me ask you about Venezuela.
Yes. Where
you have been very focused and very central to the president's policy.
Very, very swampy. You can tell by his mannerisms. He is a through and through bureaucrat.
The president said that Venezuela now is the United States, the most powerful military in the world, to protect them. And to protect them, we will. Is the United States military providing security guarantees for American companies?
We're not doing that right now, but what he means is we're changing the game for what's happening in the ground in Venezuela. Venezuela has purchased $20 billion of Russian weapons. They got Cuban mercenaries there. They supply oil to Cuba. They harbor the Hezbollah's headquarters for the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela has been a very dangerous.
Look at this man's eyes. He is there's no emotion there.
Very destabilized place going down the tubes. And with the United States' influence now by controlling the sale of their oil and therefore the flow of funds into the country, we think we will see relatively rapid change, improvement on the ground in Venezuela. This is a process.
Basically, we control Venezuela only exports oil. I mean, their entire economy is ran on oil exports. So we are saying we're going to control the transport, the sale, and distribution of Venezuelan oil. U.S. companies and U.S. Forces are going to have absolute complete control, and the U.S. military is going to prevent any trade that is not sanctioned by us. And the key here is going to be, if this nation building project is successful, is um, that the majority of the funds are returned to the Venezuelan people to be spent on them and enriching their lifestyle and infrastructure projects for the country, to show a, a, a clear difference between the previous regime and what life will look like moving forward. But he's basically saying that it's anybody inside the country of Venezuela is going to have to play ball with us because we're going to control the money, and so we're going to have a lot of say in what happens on domestic policy. We're just not going to be physically involved. We're not going to be there day to day in the country. But I mean, the opinions of the American government are going to be, basically the last say moving forward.
We're only 8 days into the process, but it's off to a strong start.
Well, it's off to a quick start. You had the oil executives at the White House just Friday. That the president, or excuse me, the State Department yesterday had a security alert I want to ask you about, because it specifically cited the risk to Americans in Venezuela. And it said armed militias are setting up roadblocks, searching vehicles for evidence of U.S. citizenship or support for the U.S. The man who runs those militias is Diosdado Cabello, who is the Minister of the Interior. Is he ordering the hunting of Americans?
Not that we are aware of, but we should be cautious. Look, this is, as they say,
If he's hunting Americans, or if he's hunting American intelligence assets, it's likely he'll be in a position of authority for much longer in Venezuela. But he's going to say something really important here, and why they're trying to work with, basically the establishment media, the previous guard is like, why are you working with these people at all? Why didn't you just remove the regime completely? Well, we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan what that led to. You remove the ruling elite, that's who you end up fighting to control the country for the next 15 years. It's a very costly endeavor. So they're trying it differently this time, saying, okay, we need to work with the people that are in power, but they need to know who's in charge. So, it's only been 8 days and they're figuring it out. And so she's, going to ask, this guy's going around and having the local gang, they control the population, terrorize them through these, criminal gangs, political gangs, is hunting for, American sympathizers, American intelligent assets. And, he's saying, as far as I know, this isn't happening, but I doubt this man would remain in any position of authority for very much longer if that was happening, especially now after that, we pretty much have taken complete command of the country, or contained it, because essentially we're doing a trade blockade.
Days into a change of leadership there. The interim authorities are trying to establish power. Collectivos have been running wild over Venezuela for over a decade.
Right.
So yeah, you're not going to.
He controls them.
He does.
So is he safe in his position? Because right now the administration seems to be working with him.
We need to work with the people that have the guns today to ultimately move the country to a representative government and a better station. But what you've got.
Bingo. He just said the magic words. The people with the guns today, they got to work with, so that they can move this nation or this state to a democratic government. So instead of removing the people we don't like completely and then having them as complete enemies, they're trying to find the ones that we can work with and stabilize the country. Because, in the end, government is force, and the government has a monopoly on force. they need to work with the people with the guns so that those guns don't turn into a full-blown insurgency that it is going to require 500,000 US troops to go in there and completely suppress. We can do it. It's just a very expensive, um, ineffective way of doing it. So, you're seeing the US government try a different method for regime change than they've ever tried before. They're kind of walking the middle line here.
To prevent in the mean term is a collapse of the nation. And I think the strong moves we're making right now is to influence the people with the guns today, which is part of a process.
And you're not concerned he's going to undermine the more business-minded President Delcy Rodriguez?
Oh, of course we're worried about things like that. We need to get stability among the leadership in Venezuela. So yes, of course we're concerned about those things.
So tell me broadly, is the Trump administration's goal here to acquire the state oil company PDVSA and to run it? Are you going to put Americans on the board? How's this going to work?
Well, again, it's a process. The first thing to do is to reduce the damage to the United States, the inflow of guns and criminals and immigrants and drugs into the United States, the destabilizing of a key part of the Western Hemisphere. We need to stop that. That's why we've entered into Venezuela. Certainly part of the way to improve Venezuela and to improve the Western Hemisphere and improve the lives of Americans is to get their very corrupt, 25 years in decline oil industry back going again.
Does that mean the United States government's going to run it? The president says we're going to run the country. Are we running?
I don't understand how these people are journalists, or this is a major broadcasting company that has, tons of resources. What are they not getting? They're not processing it. Are we going to give back the country to Venezuela? Are we going to transition and leave? No, we're not leaving. We're putting in a government that's going to make life better for the Venezuelan people, and we're going to bring back their oil industry, but we're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again. We don't have a communist revolution that takes over the entire country and U.S. investment. I mean, what they're not understanding is we're not leaving Venezuela, and you can hear it. They keep thinking that we're going to go to the old. We're just going to build up this nation and kind of not be a part of it. But then as soon as we leave, it's going to collapse. That's we're not doing Iraq 2.0.
This is, I guess, American state-owned oil company, essentially?
No, today we are running the sale of their crudes. We have a quarantine around their ability to ship oil outside of Venezuela. All of that goes through American crude marketers, and then that crude goes out into the market. We collect those funds and bring them back to Venezuela to better the lives of Americans and Venezuelans. But in the long run, what will happen with Venezuelan oil resources? Yeah, of course, quite likely you'll see American companies, expanded presence there. You'll see growing production. Of course, you're going to see more American involvement in there. But exactly how that's going to work, that's going to unfold over time.
So back in November, a U.S. judge backed a bid by an American hedge fund to purchase Citgo Petroleum.
So they're clearly telling the media what we're going to do. They're just not overtly saying it. As time goes on, yes, there's going to be more American businesses, more companies, more oil production, more labor going down there to build up the industry. So there's going to be a larger U.S. presence. And in the meantime, we're going to be trying to find partners within the Venezuelan structural elite, the people with the guns, to build a functioning government that then we, the U.S. government, is going to be the pass-through for all their income, and that pass-through ability, that controlling the outflow of oil from that country and the sell and returning of funds from that, is going to be the leverage that we have over those government officials to make sure that they are friendly to U.S. oil interests, that they're going to follow the democratic process and allow for other factions other than the current Maduro party, the party that's ruled for 25 years or so, from just wiping out their, the hardest thing for a country to do is actually have real transfers of power between one regime or another. So that we're going to make sure that happens. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to become so intertwined economically that it's going to be impossible for us to leave, especially being such a local neighbor. And I'll show you a map later on of why it's so important being the very tip of South America.
Treasury still has to approve that deal. The hedge fund is actually run by a big Trump donor, Paul Singer. Do you want to preserve Venezuelan ownership of Citgo? Do you want to have America have a financial stake in it? Like Trump bought what big portion of an Intel company. Do you want to own portions of oil companies?
Again, that's going to be up to American businesses. That's certainly a very real possibility. The Citgo sale is part of bringing redress to creditors of the United States for the Venezuelan government. And of course, one of the capital providers in that transaction is a hedge fund provider you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. There's lots of American investors and American refining entrepreneurs that are involved in that. So to take Venezuelan-owned refineries that are in the United States and legally through an auction process transfer them to American owners and American entrepreneurs in the refining business, I think that's fantastic.
And ever since the 2008 bailouts, corporate America has been taking tons and tons of taxpayer billions and trillions of dollars of taxpayer funds to for various reasons. And the U.S. taxpayer has received nothing in return for being the lender of last resort, for investing in these companies and helping them prevent themselves from going bankrupt, essentially. And a major change that the Trump administration did is that they started forcing these companies to give equity to the U.S. taxpayer. That, you know, the U.S. if the U.S. taxpayer was going to bail you out, you know, we're going to get a piece of the pie. And, you know, the sovereign wealth fund, I think that is a policy that's not going to reverse. Now, I mean, did corporate America really like being able to get bailouts and taxpayer funds and assistance without having to pay anything back in return? Of course they did. But they would never accept terms like that if they lent out the money to anybody. They would be expecting ownership and having a voice in policy. And so that the U.S. government, the U.S. taxpayer is asking for the same thing is kind of a result of, you know, corporate America taking bailouts and tax money. If they want to go back to pure capitalism and stop having taxpayer support, then they can not have the U.S. government involved on their boards. But as long as the U.S. taxpayer is going to be bailing out companies, supporting companies, it makes perfect sense to me, and I think millions of Americans, that the American taxpayer, the American system, has an ownership stake and has an ownership vote in decisions of the company. So you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Concerned about corruption here, though. Will there be Americans installed on these boards? And how do you respond to these allegations that some Trump donors are going to get preferential treatment?
I can assure you that is absolutely not the case. Absolutely not the case. Think of what President Trump has done for the American oil and gas industry. He's driven down the price of oil. He's dramatically
There's an
reduced
oversupply of oil. And now you're going to put more on the market.
Exactly. That's not good. That's not good for American oil and gas companies.
Because it makes it less profitable for them to actually go and invest in drill, baby, drill.
Exactly. Democrats.
But it's good for the American people. It's good for lowering prices because energy is the basis of the economy. So they're trying to say, well, this is not helping oil and gas companies because you're lowering the price of oil because you're oversupplying. There's already an oversupply. But what she's not understanding is that that oversupply driving down the price of oil hurts our adversaries more than it hurts us. It helps us because we have the AI revolution that is just sucking down energy, that's raising the cost of energy for regular American citizens because we're now having to compete with these AI data centers. And so this is going to lower the overall energy cost. So then energy costs for the average American really should stop rising. And two, it's going to lower oil is a major input into manufacturing. So it's going to lower the cost of manufacturing domestically. And then three, it hurts Russia and it hurts Iran's economy, which are completely oil based. If the entire world's oil supply um, lowers in cost per barrel, then nations that only rely on oil exports, especially our adversarial nations, are going to have a negative. They're not going to be able to make as much revenue, and that's probably going to help separate the alliance between Russia and Iran and China. Is because if the oil prices are lower, is China going to want a better deal than what they're paying currently? Because they're the only purchasers of Iranian and Russian oil. And so it hurts the economy of adversaries. It helps us separate their alliance, hopefully. And it helps the American people overall energy costs and the lower cost of production. She's not getting it. This is going to go down as a genius move to help the American people and to basically economically harm our adversaries without actually doing anything, without firing a shot towards our adversaries. And so they're just not understanding that. But no, it's not going to be a great profit revenue increaser for the oil companies currently. But eventually, oil prices will rise. Things will stabilize, and they're going to have sole access to oil production from Venezuela. So over time, the oil companies are going to do really well.
President Biden are fantastic for American oil and gas companies because they try to restrict the supply to something that's essential to life, which only has one possible impact, which is to drive up prices and grow profitability. So President Trump is no helper to the oil and gas industry, and certainly there's no corruption, preferential placement of people.
I have to comment on that too. He's saying Democrats actually helped oil companies more because when they restricted supply of oil, that skyrocketed the cost of oil and fossil fuel products. That those companies made a large profit, and so they want a Democrat in place. But then he emphatically denies that political appointees, those favorable to the Republicans and the Trump administration, won't get board appointed seats. That's baloney. That's just politics. Um, if the Democrats were in charge, you don't think they wouldn't be putting on their donors and their supporters in positions of authority? Excuse me. I mean, they do that all the time. You think one appointee under Biden wasn't a Democratic donor or a Democratic operative? So this is a stupid question that she's asking, and he's giving the canned answer. But I mean, that's politics. I mean, whoever's in power, they're going to put those people that support them in positions of authority. That's a silly question.
There's none of that. I can assure you of that. I'm in the center of this.
How are you going to decide the contracts? Is the Treasury going to approve the Citgo dominance there in that?
That went through a large auction to buy.
Are you going to brief to Congress the decisions you're making about which firms get access?
Absolutely. That was an auction open to all American firms. There were many bidders, including the coalition of bidders you mentioned. We want those assets to get as much money as possible to go back to the creditors of the Venezuelan government, and we want American refinery assets owned by Americans that are going to increase the throughput, drive down the price of gasoline in America.
Okay, so Secretary Rubio said there's a 3-point plan: stabilize, rehabilitate, transition. This sounds indefinite. Even when you heard some of those oil executives, Chevron's leadership, they're already in Venezuela, we should say, said it'll take 18 to 24 months to even increase oil production by 50%. So how long is this American involvement? Because he's saying there it's at least a year and a half, 2 years.
They've been there for 100 years, and likely Chevron's going to be there 50 years from now.
But the United States government, how long does that role continue?
You heard the third part of Rubio's question, which is transition. We want to bring a representative government to the people of Venezuela. I think then you'll see the full sovereignty back to the government of Venezuela. We don't have a legitimate government of Venezuela today. We'd like to move and get there. But America's there
Do you have
as
a
a
timeline?
25 years this country's gone in decline.
Yeah.
President Trump, out of the box, creative intervention has allowed us to change the game.
Yeah.
But I don't know the timeline of that. It's not weeks. It's more months. Could be a year or two. Could be more.
Okay. Secretary.
And he just said it. We're not leaving. We're not, they're asking, they're operating under the old paradigm. We did a regime change. We're not leaving. And we're trying to not make the same mistakes we made in the past. So what he essentially has said is we need to make a deal with the people with guns at first to stabilize the country. So the country's government doesn't just completely collapse and all services end and it becomes complete chaos for the whole country. And then we're fighting an insurgency after that. Starving, unhappy, miserable people with a miserable, exiled government leadership ends up becoming the insurgency. So we don't want that. So we're not having that happen. So we're doing this differently. We're going to be in there for a few years, finding the people and getting the government set up that isn't corrupt, that we're happy with. That's basically that they're paying their debts. Where they're going to make sure the people who the companies and the creditors that lost their money when the oil fields were nationalized get fully paid back. We're going to stabilize the country. And then once we have a government that is elected that we are good with, then we're going to transfer back sovereignty back over to them. And we're going to take a more of a back seat. Probably not going to, once we build the framework. But then by that time, it's a full territory. And they're going to be so intertwined in the U.S. system. I believe that there's going to be a popular movement to turn them in. Hey, I think the fair move here is stabilize the country. Open it up to investment. Make sure that it's a safe place. That the average Venezuelan starts getting their rights respected, and they get a working legal system that isn't based on power or patronage, and is based on the democratic process, and have a true opposition to where there's actual transferring of power. And then once their government's stable and their population's happy and stable, we offer them statehood and they can vote on it, and then we can ratify it. And I see that being the future for Venezuela. But it seems like a lot of these pundits, they can't seem to process that yet, because it doesn't fall into their calculus. They're thinking in of the past 20 years or so. So I want to show you something here. I brought up Google Map. So this is us here. So we have not added a state to the United States since Hawaii. And we added Hawaii because of being able to project power in the Pacific, and because of what happened during World War II and Pearl Harbor. But we have not expanded since then. So ever since World War II, we've worked under these kind of this new world order that we're going to work with these nation states, and because corporate America does not really want all these countries to become part of the United States, because if they do, then you can't have the arbitrage between how much you pay people in Mexico versus how much you pay somebody in Utah, because the federal government over the last century has become so powerful that there's not really a lot of difference between the states economically, except for maybe if they do some more tax incentives and they have certain industries. But essentially, we've controlled our market to such a degree by federal labor laws and minimum wages and things of that nature, that it's not as competitive And so that's one of the big reasons why corporate America and Wall Street, since the 70s, have really tried to move all the factories and production to other countries. Like, for example, Mexico is a huge manufacturer. And the only reason why it's such a large manufacturer is because essentially they can pay the Mexican citizen a lot less than what they have to pay a U.S. citizen within the United States. That's why so many people for a long time immigrated from Mexico, but most of the recent immigration waves have been from South America and Central America. And why? Because you can make a lot, you can make a lot more money inside the United States. So they're economic migrants. They're not running from, violence or, anything serious. They want a better way of life. So that's the reason why corporate America hasn't really wanted the expansion of the United States since World War II, because it was more profitable for corporate America to be able to pay people a lot less and not have the environmental laws that we have in the United States. But again, the environment is global, as you can see. It's all connected. So if you poison down here, it's still going to poison everything else. So it makes no sense. So we've been doing business this way for a long time. Because essentially, if you add a new state, they have to fall under the laws of the United States, all of them. And when a country is not part of the United States, a political entity, it has its own laws. That's why, why is China the biggest manufacturer on earth had become? Well, let's look at it here. They were a rural country with lots and lots of people that would work for nothing. And China was willing to pollute their entire country to be competitive in manufacturing. So it was lowering the cost point. And the two most important, most expensive aspects of the manufacturing process is your labor cost, how much you having to pay the people that work in your factories, and two, how clean do you have to be? Can you just dump chemicals in the river, or do you have to scrub everything? I mean, that's all costs money. So in the 1970s, as the United States started getting more and more environmental laws, and after the labor wars of the early 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, it come 1970s, the United States had the highest environmental protections in the world, and they had the highest pay of any worker in the world. And so the United States, corporate America, Wall Street decided that they were going to, sorry about that they were going to ship all U.S. manufacturing to places that they could pollute and obtain cheap slave labor. And so they would make a $2 pair of shoes here, and then it was cheaper to make a $2 pair of shoes here and take it all the way around the world, all the way around, all the way around, land it in a San Francisco, LA, or go through Panama Canal into an East Coast port and deliver those shoes and sell them for $300 to $400 a pair or more. So the profit margin was a huge incentive. And so what's been happening is, since the Trump movement, Make America Great, is they want manufacturing to return to the United States. So if we continue to do business the way that we've always done, in a way that's extremely beneficial to the coastal elites and their investment portfolios, but very bad for the ecosystem of the American economy, because when you're not making anything here and you're not paying a reasonable wage, um, you're not reinvesting into the field. There's nothing for the capitalist to eat on if there's no consumers. And so this is kind of the problem point they've gotten to, is that um, they have lowered their input costs to such a degree, and with upcoming AI technology and other things and robots, it's going to get to the point that they don't need as much of our labor at all. And so how is the American worker going to protect their economic and political power, is to ensure that this game doesn't continue to go on, that corporate America does not get to use slave labor in other countries to avoid paying U.S. labor. And so why I wanted to bring this up. So this is the reason why Venezuela won't be accepted just to be, again, they're talking about adding Puerto Rico, which is, look how small Puerto Rico is. Why would we add Puerto Rico? We took that as a territory because we have a base there. So it's really important for, but it makes no sense to give statehood to such a small piece of land. If you look at the United States, the original colonies, they were much smaller because of travel. But as the United States spread westward, you notice the states got bigger and bigger because you had to bring something to the table. What did you bring to the table? So a territory brought resources, not just people. That was the big point, is resources. We the reason why we expanded west, because there's all types of resources out here that the United States wanted to have control over, and to be coast to coast, manifest destiny. But after World War II, we changed the complete way we do business. And what's happening now is America is returning to the old way of doing business. If it's not in our economic interest, we're not interested in it. If it's not going to benefit us, we're not interested in it. And I think that's a hard mind shift that the people who have kind of thought the world worked one way, the old way, is thinking it's going to remain that way. So here's Venezuela. So most of the illegal immigration that the United States has been dealing with is not been come from Mexico. Mexico has quite a bit, but it kind of, that population's been kind of the same for a long time. It's mostly from Central American countries and South American countries. Venezuela, where's El Salvador? Argentina, uh, Brazil's a big one, but Ecuador, Colombia. Where is El Salvador? Oh. Hmm. But if we end up controlling Venezuela and um, Colombia, we control the north aspect of the entire South American continent. And the choke point right here, Panama, which we pretty much already control, we moved out of it, but we're retaking control of it. We control all migration moving up through South America. I mean, from South America and to Central America. So if we control both this territory and this territory, we control the entire region. Plus, these territories are large enough and rich enough to warrant becoming a state. Because there's a lot of power and political authority that comes becoming a United States citizen and becoming a state of the union. You get, representatives in Congress, you get 2 senators, and the possibility of running for all offices in our country. So, I mean, it's a fair trade, but strategically, if we control this northern part of this continent, say one of our peer adversaries sets up a base in one of these countries that they end up making a relationship with, they could not put assets here and move them up to the southern border of the United States without without meeting some stiff resistance. And plus, a choke point like this is a lot easier to control on land than a large piece of land like this. So, I mean, strategically, it makes perfect sense for us to control this. Plus, then we protect our canal that costs a lot of money and costs a lot of American lives to build. So, I mean, that's kind of this strategic idea, but I don't see why um, in the next century or so, North and South America does not all become part of the United States. Then the United States spans 2 continents. Because again, to become a state, it's all based on the people wanting to become part of us, and they get all rights and privileges of every other American citizen. And so, I mean, think about that. Instead, instead of just having mass illegal immigration, having people be taken advantage of for slave labor, having one regime after another getting overthrown because they don't fall into our interest, bring them completely under our interest, make them equal partners to where their elites can become a U.S. senator. I mean, the way we've been doing business doesn't work, and maybe changing how we do business and returning to an older order. A return to manifest destiny is the future of America. All right, so I'm going to look over the headlines from Democracy Now! And kind of give some commentary what they were doing.
The War and Peace Report.
And then we'll finish up the show for today.
I'm Amy Goodman. In Iran, over 500 protesters and 48 security officials have died in demonstrations that have roiled Iran for 2 weeks. That's according to the U.S.-based human rights activist news agency. Iranian authorities have also arrested over 10,000 people. Videos circulating online show the graphic deaths of protesters and corpses lined up in body bags outside hospitals. Iranian officials have shut off the internet and limited phone calls inside the country. Over the weekend, President Trump repeatedly threatened to attack Iran. U.S. security officials are reportedly weighing cyber attacks and direct strikes. This is President Trump speaking to reporters Friday.
I've made the statement very strongly that if they start killing people like they have in the past, we will get involved. We'll be hitting them very hard where it hurts. And that doesn't mean boots on the ground, but it means hitting them very, very hard where it hurts.
In response, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, blamed the U.S. and Israel for the protests, insisted the situation inside Iran is under control.
Both the United States and Israel have officially stated that they have interference and a role in these riots. And they are trying to turn these demonstrations and protests, which are peaceful, into violence and riots.
Speaking to reporters Sunday, President Trump claimed Iranian leaders called him to negotiate, but the U.S. may take action before a meeting. We'll have more on this story after headlines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed his support for the Iranian protesters in a speech to the Israeli cabinet Sunday.
Israel is closely monitoring developments in Iran. The demonstrations for freedom have spread across the country. The people of Israel and the entire world are in awe of the immense courage of Iranian citizens. Israel supports their struggle for freedom and strongly condemns the mass killings of innocent civilians.
Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israeli forces killed at least 3 Palestinians.
So they're setting up the narrative. So at the very same time we go into Venezuela, at the same time you start these protests erupting in Iran. We're going to war in Iran, guys. I mean, they're already setting it up. They're looking for the moral high ground here of saying, okay, we have these protesters getting killed. Now, this has happened before in Iran, where this government ends up, the Republican Guard ends up going out and shooting all the protesters until they go home. It doesn't look like that's happening. It's very likely that, we are supporting the protests in some form. And you have the President of the United States saying that if they start gunning down or trying to, by force, suppress the protests, that is cause for the U.S. forces to go in and to take out the regime. Difference is, I think this would be a lot more difficult than Venezuela, because they would likely have to remove the entire regime and would not be able to so easily replace, keep a stable government in place, because there's too much animosity between this regime and Western forces. But you have the Prime Minister of Israel basically, what he was saying is, we're keeping our tabs on these protests for freedom. Yeah, it's only a matter of time. Very, very soon we should probably be hearing something happening in Iran.
Palestinian Sunday, 1 person was killed in the Tufa neighborhood in Gaza City, while 2 others were killed in southern Gaza near Khan Yunis. Since the U.S. brokered truce, over 440 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces. Here's Mohammed Abu Asi, whose nephew was killed in Israeli strikes.
Every day houses are destroyed. Every day there's shooting, and it's random. Till now the war is ongoing. Don't listen to those saying that the war is over. The war has stopped for the Israelis only, but for us it's ongoing.
Al Jazeera is reporting a Palestinian baby, Mohammed Abu Harbid, froze to death as torrential rains and freezing winds worsen the dire humanitarian situation faced by displaced families across the Gaza Strip. Since November, 4 Palestinian children have frozen to death. This comes as the Israeli military is reportedly planning to restart intensive military operations in Gaza in March, targeting Gaza City. According to the Times of Israel, the operation would push the Yellow Line ceasefire demarcation west toward the coast of the Gaza Strip. Here in the United States, tens of thousands.
That conflict has been, is kind of falling out of the news because of everything that's going on. But it doesn't look like it's ending. It does not look like Israel will ever accept a two-state solution. It's a very sad predicament, what's happening there. I don't have much to say on that. I don't see it ending well. It's going to continue probably going the way it has gone for a very long time. So hopefully, some type of peace can be reached there soon.
Of people took to the streets over the weekend as protests against ICE spread nationwide following the fatal ICE shooting of Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of 3, killed by an ICE agent in Minneapolis last week. Thousands of protests led by the ICE Out for Good campaign took place in towns and major U.S. cities, including New York, Portland, and the Los Angeles area, where activists also held a vigil for Keith Porter Jr., an African-American 43-year-old father of 2 who was fatally shot by an off-duty ICE agent on New Year's Eve. His family's demanding transparency in the investigation into his killing. Here are voices from the anti-ICE protests this weekend in Boston.
It infuriates me. It breaks my heart to see another woman, killed, and to see so many families torn apart. And I can't be quiet about that. So
neither can I.
Yeah, of course.
The line was George Floyd, and Renee Good's murder is just showing how far we have crossed that line, and I think that these men need to be held accountable.
This comes as Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has vowed to deploy hundreds more federal agents in Minneapolis in response to the protests. Meanwhile, more video footage has emerged depicting the minutes before Renee Good was fatally shot.
I have some commentary to give on this. I just want you to see the whole piece before I give this perspective.
What appears to be cell phone footage recorded by an ICE agent. Good is seen sitting in her car as the agent circles around her vehicle in the middle of the road. Good tells the agent, quote, "That's fine, I'm not mad at you," right before she was shot dead. Good's wife is also seen recording the encounter on her cell phone. One agent is heard saying, quote, "effing bitch." Renee Good's wife, Becca Good, released her first statement following the fatal shooting. She described her partner as kind, saying, quote, "Renee was a Christian who knew that all religions teach the same essential truth. We're here to love each other, care for each other, and keep each other safe and whole," unquote. About their encounter with ICE, she said, quote, "We had whistles, they had guns," unquote. At the Golden Globe Awards last.
So now they're trying. So again, this is all politics, and if we want to talk about the immunity and the actual amount of power that police forces in this country have, but here's the fact: American citizens are shot and killed every single day by law enforcement in vehicle-related encounters. This includes people driving away. There is a case being heard before the Supreme Court that's talks just Barnes versus Felix of 2025, where the officer jumped on the car as the man was driving away and shot him dead. And basically, they're trying to expand the scope to say where an officer has to take the totality of the situation, not just a few seconds before they took lethal action. But I mean, I think this is a case of white woman privilege here. Is Americans are shot every single day by law enforcement for very similar situations, to where a vehicle is considered a lethal weapon. Now, if we want to talk about how much protection or immunity that law enforcement has for its actions, um, that's a change that as a people we should talk about. And police forces should not be able to have almost zero cause. But the the courts in the United States have ruled over and over again that basically law enforcement has almost no burden of proof to prove that they were in fear of their life. It's just that she was in a vehicle and had been using it like a weapon, and he was in front of it. Um, I mean, case law is there is going to basically find him not liable. And um, what I find disingenuous is that there was this idea of privilege that you would see leftist activists being encouraged to do, to basically physically threaten and impede law enforcement. And I mean, people get shot every single day in American cities for doing half of what this woman did. And I mean, 9 times out of 10, the majority of the time, um, very, very, the officer is never found liable for anything, because we've pretty much have given government forces almost complete utter immunity from their actions. And they just have to say certain words or do certain actions happen, and they can react to it. That they're making this a political issue of their side and not making it a policing issue or a constitutional right issue for the entire country. For decades, for a very long time, there have been many Americans who wanted to have these basically no guardrails from law enforcement conduct under some form of control. But um, I mean, you're stupid to drive a car like that around, around a law enforcement officer like that. Um, but again, there's this. I think it's more like privilege. Like they believe that they were somehow above the law, or that this wasn't going to happen. Um, I think these protesters just need to stop using the vehicles as weapons and should not be physically impeding. You can follow, you can record, you can question. I mean, you can even be an asshole and harass, but I wouldn't get close to them like that, and I wouldn't keep blocking them. So I mean, it's not gonna end well. But the case law is not on their side. The courts have ruled over and over again that basically the officer's life supersedes everything else. And I mean, it's currently being argued, or going to be argued in front of the Supreme Court soon, is that this officer in Barnes versus Felix 2025, the guy he had stopped the man, and the man had started to drive off, and the police officer was not in front of the vehicle. The police officer jumped onto the car on its side, reached in, and shot the man dead as he was driving off. So that's just one case, but I mean, I'm sure there are many others. So again, if this is a conversation as a people that we want to have about how much power and authority should law enforcement have nationwide, uh, what I mean, how much burden of proof do they need to prove that they're in danger and that they can use lethal force? Because this is not an issue that just appeared overnight, but that it happened to a leftist um, agitator is I think where the main shock's coming in, is that I think leftist white women believe that they're above the law and that their actions don't have consequences. And I mean, when you're dealing with law enforcement like that, you better be watching your P's and Q's, because they have a lot of power under U.S. law and under U.S. case law. The courts have not, held them accountable for a very long time. The George Floyd incident was one example where there was something done, but that's extremely rare. Most of the time, nothing's ever done. The action happens, a court says it was justified, and then it goes away, or the family gets paid a settlement and it goes away, but the power remains. So, I mean, if I think they would have more traction with both sides of the political spectrum if they wanted to have a broader conversation about this issue, and the idea of law enforcement having just blanketed implied immunity. The calls by local government officials from the state are just, it's just politics. They're just playing politics with this woman's life. But I mean, if anything, this should change their tactics quite a bit in protesting. It's not. I think that's the last time that protesters are going to use their vehicles to attack or block or harass law enforcement, ICE law enforcement, any form of law enforcement. So I mean, this conduct would have gotten harsh treatment from any law enforcement agency. So it doesn't make logical sense. But it does if you think from a position of privilege of, oh, well, I can do and say whatever I want and act in any way, and nothing's going to happen to me. And I think that was shown to not be true.
Last night, a number of attendees wore pins with the messages, "Be good" and "Ice out." We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast. Venezuela's interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, has requested help from the U.S. military to retrieve an oil tanker that departed Venezuela without permission. That's according to the New York Times, which reported what is the first known military collaboration between Venezuela and the U.S. since the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. On Friday, President Trump signed an executive order declaring a national emergency to ensure revenue from Venezuelan oil held by the U.S. Treasury is protected from being seized in lawsuits or creditor claims. The move would prevent the use of Venezuelan oil revenue from being used in judicial proceedings ahead of Maduro's anticipated trial on narco-terrorism charges. This comes as President Trump posted on Truth Social a fake image of a Wikipedia page labeling him as the acting president of Venezuela. On Friday, President Trump...
This dude trolls them to no end. Acting president. I think that's a smart move. He's freezing the assets to make sure that American creditors can't go to U.S. courts and say, hey, we need that money because when they nationalized the oil fields, they took all our money, which is technically true, but they only have access to it because we removed Maduro and we took control of the fields. The U.S. government needs those funds to help out to return equity to the Venezuelan people. I mean, this is about goodwill now. The key is stabilizing the country, and then that the president, the new acting president of Venezuela, is asking for military support is just showing that it looks like Venezuela is going to stabilize quickly.
Met with oil executives at the White House, including ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron, urging them to invest $100 billion in Venezuela's oil production. This is President Trump speaking to Chevron's Vice Chair, Mark Nelson.
I remember 6 months ago, I told you to stay, just stay. Things are going to happen. You'll be very happy. I didn't know they were going to happen this fast or this conclusively. One thing I think everyone has to know is that if we didn't do this, China or Russia would have done it.
The Nobel Institute has rejected an offer by right-wing Venezuelan opposition figure Maria Corina Machado to share her Nobel Peace Prize with President Trump. Once a Nobel Prize is announced, it cannot be revoked, shared, or transferred to others, the Institute said. In response, the White House said in a statement, Trump, quote, deserves the Nobel Peace Prize many times over, unquote. Trump said in an interview with Fox News last week that it, quote, would be a great honor to receive the prize from Machado, who said in a separate Fox interview that presenting the prize to Trump would be an act of gratitude from the Venezuelan people for the ouster of Nicolas Maduro. The Washington Post reported President Trump was not willing to support Machado because she accepted the Peace Prize. The source said, quote, if she had turned it down and said, I can't accept it because it's Donald Trump, she'd be president of Venezuela today, unquote. Machado is scheduled to meet with President Trump in Washington, D.C. this week.
I mean, let's be honest here. The Europeans just hate Trump, and they want to spite him in every way they can. So they gave her the Nobel Peace Prize. She, where he's stopped a bunch of wars, and obviously he's the president of the United States, so he has more power and ability to change things. And because he didn't make her didn't turn to her, which, he's right. She doesn't have any sway over the men with guns inside Venezuela. So putting her back into power, again, every time we do do things the way the Europeans want it, is always led to failure. And it's only American lives and American treasure that's lost. So when we do it their way, we're always holding the bag, and it doesn't work out. And so I think he's making a very pragmatic move here. Is that, yeah, she has the support of the Europeans, but one, they're not putting any boots on the ground. They're not putting any treasure. They're not putting any risk. So their opinion doesn't matter. Two, she doesn't have the support of the people in the government who have the guns. And we want to stabilize the country. Now, once the country's stabilized and we can ensure there's fair elections, why shouldn't she return and run for a fair election and see if she wins? But just handing her over power now would require, again, the problem we're trying to avoid. We would have to remove the entire government of Venezuela, the men with guns. Then we'd have to do that with guns. And then those men with guns would disappear into the jungle, and then we'd be fighting them for years in the jungle. Instead of fighting them in the hills and mountains of Iraq or the slums of Iraq, we would have to fight them in the jungles, which we could, but it's something that can be avoided because she has no power or authority to run that country. So to put her in power would require us to remove the entire regime, and that would require men with guns to enforce that rule. And so that's why they're not doing it. And I think history will remember this kindly. Is she popular? I mean, did she win the Nobel Peace Prize? So what? It doesn't mean anything. It's not strategically sound. I think they're doing this a lot more strategically sound this time. They're not going to force somebody in power who doesn't have any power, who can't help the U.S. stabilize the country. And they're just going to have to live with that. Now, she's sitting there offering, I'll give up my Nobel Peace Prize if you'll just put me in power. And the Europeans are saying, you can't transfer your Nobel Peace Prize. So she knows that without U.S. backing, she's not going to be able to do anything. She's just a puppet. She's just a voice. But hypothetically, in time, once the country stabilized, she could return back once there's elections and run for office and win the country. She's not going to be put into power because it's strategically unsound. It would require us to go to war with the party in power now completely and utterly and replace them all, because a lot of them are not going to follow this woman. They're not going to listen to her. And so it's not what the U.S. is doing right now is strategically sound.
Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel has rejected threats by President Trump, who on Sunday said the island would no longer receive oil or aid from Venezuela and that it should strike a deal with Washington. Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "There will be no more oil or money going to Cuba, zero. I strongly suggest they make a deal before it's too late," unquote. Diaz-Canel responded saying, quote, "Cuba's a free, independent, and sovereign nation. Nobody dictates what we do. Cuba does not attack. It has been attacked by the U.S. for 66 years, and it does not threaten. It prepares, ready to defend the homeland to the last drop of blood," unquote. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette.
That's big talk. Cuba has been a thorn in our side since the 60s. The Cuban expats, the exiles, which our Secretary of State Marco Rubio is a part of that group, they want Cuba. A lot of investment was lost in Cuba, and so they're going to want Cuba returned. Cuba, without the Soviet Union, without a big brother to back them, had no ability to withstand U.S. pressure. After the Bay of Pigs and which was a catastrophe, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was because the Soviet Union and us made an agreement that we're not going to move on Cuba. But I think those days are over. Again, if we go back to the world map, Cuba is right off our coast. So again, Cuba is the linchpin to the whole Caribbean. It's the largest island. So again, we're not going to make a little place. I have to go in super close to it to even find Puerto Rico. This little island, a state. But again, this would solve a lot of the immigrant issues. We have a ton of immigrants, illegal immigrants from Dominican Republic, tons from Haiti. And we have lots of immigrants who are political immigrants from Cuba. But then, hypothetically, this entire island chain could become a state, just like Hawaii. It would be larger than Hawaii and more significant. It could become a state. So it's very likely that we're moving on Cuba very soon. And that big talk, again, if it's in our interest, so they're not understanding. So Americans who went and fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, they thought it was in America's interest to do so. And they found out that it really wasn't, that we were being used and it wasn't anything for us. But everything here that we're doing today is in our strategic interest. So if Cuba is brought under, Cuba's economy is terrible. I mean, again, they're famous for having all the cars that they had when the communists took over the country. They couldn't get any other cars in, so they have all these pristine 1950s cars, which are beautiful, but but it's like time froze, so they never moved on. So yeah, Cuba, Iran, and then you have the I'm sure she hasn't talked about it yet, but the president of Colombia talking big as well. But again, narco state. I mean, it's very famous for all the cocaine that built Miami came from Colombia. I mean, there's a lot of history on that. So, yeah, no, Cuba's talking big, but it would make sense because theoretically, it would make sense for the United States because then we would control the entire Caribbean from Puerto Rico. And then, you think Haitians wouldn't be okay with that, or Dominicans wouldn't be okay with that if they were offered statehood and said, hey, okay, if from all this entire island chain becomes one state and you can become part of the United States, and guess what? You're no longer illegal immigrants. You can go and come as you please, but other Americans from other parts of the United States can go and come as they please. That's something you could sell to both the Dominicans, the Haitians, the Puerto Ricans, and eventually the Cubans, is that you have all rights and privileges. But then, again, it makes sense because it's right in our backyard. I mean, in the 60s, we allowed, the Soviet Union almost put nuclear missiles here to point at the United States. I mean, if this is not in our strategic best interest, I mean, I don't know what is.
Frederickson said her country is at a fateful moment over President Trump's repeated threats to take over Greenland, the autonomous territory controlled by Denmark. Speaking at a political rally, she said, quote, "What is at stake is bigger than what the eye can see, because if what we experience from the Americans is that they're actually turning their backs on the Western alliance, that they are turning their backs on our NATO cooperation by threatening an ally, which we have not experienced before, then everything will stop," she said.
See, this is all big talk. I'm so tired of hearing this from NATO. You do nothing. Denmark is not a they without the United States military, Europe would fall. Europe is not capable of defending itself. The only militarily capable countries in all of Europe is the UK, Germany, and France, and Poland now because they're buying so many weapons from us. But outside of that, there is no military in Europe. NATO is the United States. We have the nuclear umbrella. We protect all of Europe with our nuclear umbrella. And this little country from Viking days, when it was a powerful Viking nation, ended up settling Greenland a long, long time ago. This is Greenland, which is mostly covered in ice, it's uninhabitable by most people, and so it's never really mattered to us. So, you know, most of the world said, oh, it's okay, Denmark can keep this, and they're an autonomous region, saying 70,000 people who control this entire landmass want to have freedom and be their own country. It is not tenable. It does not work in the world of power politics. And so what the U.S. is saying is that they're just going to get taken over by somebody else, because those 70,000 people are not capable of holding this landmass. Now that it's become strategically relevant, if you think a lot more, if this land was capable of having a lot more people on it, a lot of people from Denmark would have gone over and lived there because it's covered in ice. But because they did nothing with it, and it's now become strategically important. Again, they're threatening. Oh, the NATO alliance wouldn't exist anymore. You don't have any cards to play in this. What are you talking about? The NATO alliance wouldn't exist. We don't need the NATO alliance. The United States does not need NATO. NATO needs us. Period. That is point blank. Period. That's why they're talking about Ukraine. It would not get solved, that we would not be able to stop the Russian invasion without U.S. boots on the ground. And the American citizens said, no, we are not going to go fight that war for you. And they've been crying and bitching and yelling, but they're not putting their people on the ground. They're not sending German citizens over there. They're not sending Austrian citizens over there. They're not sending French citizens over there, because their people refuse to fight. But they'll send some poor kid from the United States to go fight their war. But then tell us that we need you to bleed for us, pay for everything. But then when we tell you, the United States says, hey, we need this piece of land that you guys don't use for anything, and you're giving it up. Well, why can't you just keep the same agreement you've always had? You know, you can invest in us and put bases on Greenland to protect us, but we get to keep the rights to it. We get to keep the ownership of it. No, that makes no sense. You want us to better the property. You want us to improve it. You want us to protect you. There's a cost to this. And, you know, there's a lot of these countries like this that think that they have a lot more sway than they really do. And so, yeah, no, Denmark, I like another caster just said, they're just negotiating on the price. Denmark's given up Greenland. It's happening. And it's not going to really matter what the 70,000 people in Greenland want. Again, I mean, it'd be very easy just to pay off every Greenlander a few $1 million and just say, be happy. You're now a United States citizen. We paid you millions of dollars per person because you're part of that purchase. And we give some money to Denmark to make them happy. But this idea, this threat that they keep putting out that the NATO alliance will be over. It's been over without us. You need us. So they should shut up and stop making comments like that, because I mean, the American people already, well, oh, well, there's a lot of support. There's a lot of support for NATO in the ruling class of America, but not in the population. Either most of the country doesn't know anything about what NATO is or the history or it all, and the American people that serve in the military, who run the society, who build everything, they could care less about NATO. We don't need NATO, not at all. Now, are we willing to stay in it to keep people happy? Do we want? We're friends with it, but let's be honest here. Europe needs us. Europe is a protector of the United States. One, Germany, France, and United Kingdom could never get along long enough to build a cohesive. So this is the military power, the ability to defend of the entire European continent. It is three countries: Germany, France, United Kingdom. France lost the last war and hasn't fought one since. They have military forces, but they gave up their entire empire basically. We took over the controlling of that. Germany, we neutered after World War II, so their people have no, in general, talking millions of soldiers, they don't have the ability to put people capable of fighting on the lines, where America has significant military population that has served generation after generation. We're quite capable of it. And the United Kingdom. So these three countries are the only ones with the technology or the industrial capacity to build a functional military, but they couldn't get along in their politics long enough to ever do it. It would be three separate armies, three separate militaries with countries no bigger than a mid-sized United States state. How I need to. Yeah. Well, let's reorient this a little bit. It's not what I wanted. So, I mean, we're talking about actual ability to do anything, and they really don't. So Europe really needs to stop talking as much as it does. I mean, we're the only thing preventing the Russians, from having complete dominion over them, because the Russians do have the industrial capacity to build and the population to actually put forth a large enough army. And Europe can't protect itself from a Russian army without the United States. And so the European Union is really nothing. These are all separate countries still. They do not work together, especially when it comes to defense. Without the United States, Europe is helpless. So all this big talk is out. So what it's looking like is very, very soon, the United States will be expanding. We will take in Greenland as part of us, which mostly will just be for military and resource production. It'll give control of the North, and as the ice is melting, these paths are starting to open up, and so we want to be able to counter this gives Russia more access to the ocean. The North Pole does, and also it gives China some access as well. So we want to have some control over that. It'll give us I mean, I know he makes jokes about it, but it's quite possible, in the next 100 years, in the next 15 years, Greenland, Venezuela, Colombia, and the Caribbean could become part of the United States. And soon after that, it doesn't make sense why Central America wouldn't become part of it, and Canada. And then, who's to say in 100 years of expansion, the United States isn't going to be one continuous nation from North to South America, from the North Pole to the South Pole. I think that's the manifest destiny of the future. Not from sea to shining sea anymore, from North to South Pole. And the old way of doing things is pretty much over.
Her comments came in response to President Trump's latest remarks threatening force against Greenland.
Right now, we are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor. Okay? I would like to make a deal, the easy way, but if we don't do it the easy way, we're going to do it the hard way.
The Justice Department has launched a...
So, yeah, you're hearing it from the man right there. We are going to take over Greenland. That will be ours. And so, again, Canada could not survive without us. They need us. They must export their goods to us. It does not make any sense in the modern age to have these separations, other than that they want different laws in the United States. But if if the United States loosened up some of the centralization that we've done over the last century, and gave these states more autonomy, meaning that there was more economic differences between various states, allowing for Wall Street and the business community to find arbitrage deals, be able to find labor arbitrage, ways to make some money off of the situation. I think this is the way going forward, because it solves everything. It solves the illegal immigration issue. Most people who are immigrating from South America and Mexico are economic migrants, meaning they just want to come up here and make money and send it back home. Well, if federal control, if federal supremacy fell off a little bit, and say maybe our labor laws and our economic policies were given a little bit more power to the states to make their own decisions on that, saying, basically being able to set their own minimum wages a little bit more, having a lot less centralized interference. I don't see why this won't be a win-win, but the manifest destiny of the future, is I'm foreseeing it, is from North Pole to South Pole. And and it continues what America's vision of the past was, is that we leave the old world to do what it wants, and we make the new world here. We have a lot more in common with South America than we do with the rest of the old world. And Europe can come under the fold and move under us as well, because they don't seem to be able to do it themselves. But in the end, the world is starting to consolidate, and that's what you're really seeing, is that you can't have these various we didn't do well with the US system and the Soviet system. They were two competing systems that couldn't get along. So we lived in the problem of thermonuclear war for 40 years. We can't sit here for the rest of it, of human history, risking, going to these massive wars with other nations. And the best way of solving that is bringing them all under one political system, where all these issues can be solved in a domestic political issue instead of, adversarial nations. So what they were trying to do with the UN and the new global order, where Europe would be a big head of that, to bring everybody under one political umbrella, didn't work, because it was all backed by U.S. blood and U.S. treasure. They didn't have the power to make it reality, and they relied on us to do it. Why shouldn't the United States just do it themselves? Why do we need the Europeans? Why do we need to be under their system? Well, they should be under our system. And so that's the big argument that's going on here. And so, Canada recently with the tariff war was, we're not going to become the 51st state, as Trump was trolling them, obviously. We're not going to do that. Well, but they really panicked when he put huge tariffs on all their exports, because everything they make, they export to us. They don't have enough. Again, frozen tundra. They don't have the people. They don't have the population. They just like to sit up here and hate on Americans, but in the end, they need us. And historically, they're our brethren anyways. I mean, that was what the War of 1812 was, is, after the American Revolution, all the Tories, who were part of the original colonies, had to leave, and they went up to Canada, and we tried to take over Canada, and Britain, our old mother country, came over and spanked us, and we haven't tried to go back in since then. But again, we took over for them. We're taking care of mom now, dad. We're making sure they're okay. The old man of Europe is being protected by us, but then they don't like the way that the United States wants to deal with it and fix it. They want to have, they want to stay the head of the table. They want to stay in the position of authority. Well, again, you gave that up a long time ago. So the center of the Western Empire, the Western experiment, is the United States. We are the center. And what's happening is the United States is saying, we are the center, and we are returning to manifest destiny. We have a destiny to unite the world and to make it as a peaceful and prosperous place, and to end these massive wars. We got ourselves involved in 2 world wars with this continent. Almost all of American history, why we were isolationists, is because we said we didn't want to get in all the repeated wars one after another. The constant wars between England and France, the constant wars between them and Germany, and going back and forth, battling for control of these separate little countries. And Europe, over thousands of years, have not found a way to unite outside of the Roman Empire and Charlemagne. Outside of the Holy Roman Emperor, they have not found any way to unite militarily and economically. And that's what the European Union was. It was an experiment of that. So again, the whole world order is changing. And I think there's a lot of people who are just not wanting to accept that this new reality is what it is. But again, it makes no sense why the #1 military power on earth, the greatest republic to ever set foot, is listening to the old country, is being told what to do by them, and they're just hating it. And Canada only exists because, one, Britain could no longer control its empire anymore, and two, we have a long history with them, and we just did business with them and had no reason to bring them under the fold. But it makes no sense to take in Greenland and then not to expand north. But again, these are invisible political lines, but then it would bring everybody under the same political system. And then then the original American thought process comes into play. That America was an economic cooperative. So the reason why labor from North Carolina could go to West Virginia or go to Delaware is because we were a united economic country for mutual defense and for economic trade. So one state could trade with another state. Labor could move from one place to another. They weren't tied to the land. They weren't Kentuckian and they couldn't leave. Like in old Europe, you were a serf of England. You couldn't go and live in France and become a French peasant. You were stuck. You could not leave. So a big part of it was that we're not only a military cooperative, but we're also an economic cooperative. And Wall Street and the rich of the world were able to get around this by international trade and being able to open factories other places without actually being a part of the United States, without being part of the same political system. And the people, the citizens of these nations are rejecting that. The Americans are rejecting that wholeheartedly. And eventually, the French, the Germans, and all of Europe are going to reject this new world order and this way of doing business that Americans and Europeans have to compete with slave labor in Mexico or Brazil, South America, or in China or India. I mean, what was the point of the Vietnam War if Vietnam is now one of our biggest trading partners? We couldn't have just made a deal with them and wasting all those lives and all those bombs. So America is ready for intelligent thinking, bold thinking, and I think the world's just not ready for that. I don't think they're going to get less Trump. I think they're going to get more Trumps in the future. And I think the world's going to have to learn to digest it. It's It's the power political economy now. It's spheres of influence again. North and South America is our sphere of influence. Europe will be our sphere of influence. And the Middle East, where we have allies, will be our sphere of influence. We'll still have the same relationship with India, but China is probably going to have its sphere of influence in the South China Sea. You know, it's going to expand a little bit. We're not going to be able to fight all that all the time, but there'll be some, you know, in the end, you know, a power is either growing or declining, and this idea that America was going to decline and quietly go away is just bonkers. That they ever thought the American citizenship would ever accept that. So America's expanding. Let's finish this out and give the last bit of commentary.
Criminal
and then
investigation into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. He said the DOJ had issued subpoenas related to his congressional testimony about the central bank's $2.5 billion renovation of its Washington, D.C. headquarters last year. Powell, who was appointed by President Trump back in 2017, accused the administration of threatening criminal prosecution to pressure him to lower interest rates. This is Chairman circulating on.
My bad. I got to get back to that part. Trump super regrets making Jerome Powell his Fed chair in the last administration. He's not happy about that. This guy's only stayed on to be a thorn in this administration's side. He wants him out. So a big reason why the economy is not getting better or getting juicing up at all is because the rich want to keep interest rates higher. That's really what it is. And so he's being told keep interest rates higher, and he's going to come up with any excuse to do it. And you know, we have this idea that you know, the Federal Reserve is a non-political entity, but that's really not true. As when you know, remember the broadcasts where I had the CEO of Bank of America on, and you know, no, just Wall Street wants to be able to tell the Fed what to do. And so, you know, if you're going to have central banking, I think that's going to be a big question going forward, especially with, you know, the bailouts and being the lender of last resort, which the American taxpayer, you know, has to take on that cost. Is a central bank going to be allowed to be a non-political entity anymore? Because it is political. It's just political to whatever the largest banks in the country want. You know, it's political to it listens to Wall Street, listens to the banks, but it's not answerable to the American people. It makes no sense, especially when it's our money that is used by the Federal Reserve. So it makes no sense. But again, this is an ending of a way of doing business of the last century. So that's why the Trump administration has been such a cataclysmic, you know, transformative political movement, because it wasn't just the same side handing out the ball and them agreeing on things. This was two very different sides of the American political thought, and one losing power it's had for a century, which it set economic policy. It created the central bank. It got us into 2 world wars. It got us into Vietnam. It got us to an Afghanistan, Iraq. It got us into all these problems. It's ruled since 1918. And it gave us the income tax. It said high taxes, everything. Let's do this way. This is how we do business. To the side that doesn't like central banking, that believes that money should be backed by gold, that wants to not get involved in everyone's wars. If there's nothing in it for us, why should we do it? These are the two main forces in American thought process and economic theory since the very beginning. It's Jefferson versus Hamilton. That's what's going on here. So yeah, Trump's going to be very happy to have this guy go. And then guess what? Interest rates are going to drop. And then the housing market's going to skyrocket, because the only way we're going to get out of this inflation is through growth. The only way the American citizen is going to end up being able to afford a house again, or being able to, you know, prosper at all, is through massive growth and increasing of wages. because Wall Street's never going to let the pricing fall, because his mandate at the Fed is to maintain 2% inflation, meaning prices every year must go up by 2%. Because if inflation isn't happening, you risk deflation, and when deflation happens, if the underlying asset drops in price, then guess what? All the derivative financial products created pegged to that commodity or asset has to fall too. And so that means people's 401ks would collapse. The pension fund would collapse. They would take heavy losses. So prices must always be increasing to stabilize the investment market, to make sure that there isn't massive deflation of assets. I think it's not capitalistic to do that, but that's the reason why they put it in place, was to prevent booms and busts in the stock markets. But again, it allows for a lot of moral hazard. But again, Hamilton wanted a central bank like England had and all of Europe had, and the Jeffersonians didn't want it. And we've had central banking, got rid of central banking, got it back. Again, this is a big, are we more like Europe, or Europe becomes more like us? We're in that same fight right now. So yeah, he can't wait till this guy gets out.
In criminal prosecution to pressure him to lower interest rates. This is Chairman Powell.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
And the Smithsonian's Portrait Gallery has removed text referring to President Trump's 2 impeachments when replacing his photo portrait as part of the museum's American Presidents exhibition. The text that was taken down read that President Trump was, quote, impeached twice on charges of abuse of power and incitement of insurrection after supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. He was acquitted by the Senate in both trials, unquote. Last year, President Trump ordered Smithsonian officials to review all exhibits before the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th. Before the review, President Trump had fired the head archivist of the National Archives and tried to fire the National Portrait Gallery's director, Kim Saget, but the board resisted. She later resigned. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, Democracy Now!
So that last part didn't really matter, but, who writes the history does matter. Trump's going to be remembered that he was impeached twice, but it's going to be remembered that he was impeached twice in political lynchings, essentially. I mean, Trump is the first real transfer of political power in this country in over a century. I'm sorry. When Kennedy, this idea that we need to protect democracy, that we've had transfers of power. We have not had real transfers of power in this country for over a century. I keep going back to an interview where Putin stated, he's sat through multiple U.S. presidencies, and policy always stays the same. No. And it's probably been scrubbed or hard to find. But a few years ago in an interview he was talking to a foreign a foreign news agency, and he was basically saying that there's no real difference between any president, and it doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican, and that's what Americans with Trump were rejecting. You're having populist movements throughout the West. I mean, you see them talking about, look, Iran is erupting in populist uprising. I mean, that's been happening all throughout Europe, in France and England, and but again, you cannot say you're a democracy if you're not willing to accept those you don't agree with winning in a fair competition, because essentially what democracy is that we have this agreed upon game and we play by these rules. And because we are people, men of honor, we will live by these rules. But if the rules are broken and if people cheat and you don't have a fair game, or they're unwilling to transfer power to, say, a regime that does not see things in trade or in war the same way as you do, um, the the instinct for humans is to not give it up. And so, I mean, a republic, a democracy is a very, very fragile thing. And that's why they always call this a great experiment. But that's why it's important to have these conversations and to talk about it. Maybe I'll find it somewhere other time. It's a very old one. Well, I mean, I'll save that for a different broadcast if I can find it. I want to say thank you for watching No Liberty, No Life. Our broadcast, I'm going to try to go live usually at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Sometimes I'm a little later, but as I go, continue doing this, I should get a little faster and a little bit more adept at this. So I would love to hear your comments, what you think about my analysis. If you have any questions you would like to answer to the next cast, I have no issue addressing that. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And I should be doing a few other episodes for other shows later on. You have a great rest of your day. Thank you for watching No Liberty, No Life. I'm your host, Torrin Voss, and over and out.